Hey there, it's your insider, Sindy Thomas, welcoming you into Season 2 of the Insiders Career Club. Our podcast helps job seekers succeed in their career search. We share information on different careers, and we keep those employed in the know with timely career news and advice. As an in-house talent acquisition recruiter, manager, and director, I've interviewed thousands of candidates and worked with managers to fill their positions. In over 25 plus years, I've witnessed firsthand numerous candidates fail, whether it was on their resumes or in their interviews. But you can succeed by getting help from a professional, from someone who's been on the inside. Me. Understand what employers look for in their candidates. Listen to the podcast regularly, and you can learn a lot. Our website, www.insiderscareerclub.com, has free resources for your job search. Now, for those who are serious about succeeding, you can sign up for personalized career services. We'll tailor it specifically to you to help you land that great position. Okay, Insiders, we have got an awesome guest for you today. His name is Phil Johnson, and he's the CEO of the Master of Business Leadership program. And his background includes a 20-year career in the semiconductor industry. By the time he left Silicon Valley, he was a corporate executive, and he left corporate America to fulfill a promise he made to himself in 1968 when his mother died. Phil broke away from the herd to find a way to lead it in a better direction. Since then, he's been coaching executives to excellence. For the last 2 decades, the MBL program has enabled corporate executives as well as organizations to achieve personal and professional success. There are MBL alumni across the U.S. and Canada, in the U.K., and all across Europe and many other countries. Let's welcome him in so he can share his wisdom about EI with us. Phil, welcome to the Insiders Career Club podcast. I'm so pleased you're joining us today and that you'll be sharing with us about emotional intelligence. I know that the listeners will benefit greatly by listening today.
Oh, thanks, Cindy. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Pleasure to have you. Let's start off by having you share just a little bit more about yourself with us.
I'm 68. I've been an executive coach working with executives and organizations around the world for the last 21 years, helping them to get better business and personal results by developing their emotional intelligence.
Okay. Now, I know that since 2008, you've been an executive leadership coach, but you came from a strong background in Silicon Valley and semiconductors previously to that. Can you share with us what jettisoned you into making that big career change?
That's a great question. The 20 years I spent in the semiconductor industry was actually the anomaly. I'd actually gotten on the journey I'm on now 54 years ago in January of 1968, a month after my mother had died. So I decided I wanted to do this work. So what I do now really comes full circle with the promise I made to myself in 1968.
Okay. So then could you tell us more about your own journey with EI or consciousness?
Oh, yeah. Yep. I was born with dyslexia. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 5. And back in those days, there was no such thing as dyslexia, ADD, or ADHD. I was just labeled a slow learner. I didn't actually realize that I had dyslexia until about 35 years ago. Because my brain doesn't work the way most people's brains work, it forced me to do a lot of what I refer to now as emotional labor, helped me develop my emotional intelligence, which serves me well in coaching others.
Okay. All right. Sounds interesting. I mean, you were using a disadvantage to help you in another way to relate to others.
Yes. I actually consider it a gift. It's like a blind person that develops great hearing as a compensation. So I'm very glad I was born with dyslexia.
Okay. Well, great. What did you see when you were in business that was missing from executive leadership that inspired you to focus on developing your MBL program?
Leadership and the toxicity in the environments. The current level of employee engagement worldwide, according to Gallup, is about 13%. So organizations in general are toxic work environments where people don't feel safe to take risk. Low levels of employee engagement is costing U.S. economy alone over $1 trillion a year. Mm. And there's almost a one-to-one correlation between the level of employee engagement and the level of customer engagement. So if your employees don't feel engaged, likely neither do your customers.
I agree that disengaged employees can cost the business because they are displaying a lack of professionalism. Also, by not doing their jobs well, it may result in a loss of business. To clients and customers, the first point of contact is the employee. They represent the overall business. So if employees don't provide a high level of service, the business will suffer and revenue will be lost. Yeah, I understand.
There's a lack of trust.
We're talking about emotional intelligence, and I know that just from the last couple of years and a lot of the reading that I do, whether it's coming from Harvard Business Review or McKinsey or Forbes, whatever, emotional intelligence has become a buzzword within the workplace. How would you define emotional intelligence, and why would you say it's critical to us on both our professional level as well as a personal level?
Yeah, great questions. An easy definition of emotional intelligence is it's developed in the process of doing what I call the emotional labor required to leave our comfort zone in order to get better results. See, we've got a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change. So whenever we change in innovation always triggers fear and anxiety in us. So the willingness to move through that fear and anxiety towards the vision of your desired results helps to develop your emotional intelligence. It also raises your level of consciousness about what's going on in you and around you while enabling you to become a more inspirational leader.
Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit about fear? Because I know that probably the general population might think of fear as being something outside of themselves, but I think that it is more of how we're perceiving what we consider to be a threat. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There's a part of our old lizard brain called the amygdala that tries to keep us safe by making sure we never leave our comfort zone. And if we do, it automatically secretes a hormone into our bloodstream called cortisol. And that causes our prefrontal cortex, the executive center of our brain, to shut off. And we go into what psychologists refer to as an amygdala hijack, fight, flight, or freeze mode. Some people lash out. Some people run away. Some people freeze like a deer in the headlights. And when that happens in conflict situations, sometimes people die. And when it happens in business or personal situations, relationships die. We burn trust. So as an analogy, if you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child, the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or a big sister to quiet that amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that change creates in us and move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve. Some scientists estimate that in this century, we will experience the equivalent of roughly 20,000 years worth of change. So we're facing a tsunami of change with a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change.
The amount of change you've mentioned, Phil, is quite daunting. And it becomes even more disturbing when we think about the fact that we're fighting our nature when we actually make changes in our behavior. So in the last 3 years of the pandemic, there's been more change than we've ever seen before. We've had changes in where we work, changes in how we work, changes in how we shop, socialize, and even govern ourselves. When you saw the rioting in the streets, the complaints, the pushback, people that didn't wear masks, we saw that people weren't willing or ready to handle the changes that we saw. And there was resistance in multiple areas of society. Can you share a little bit more about which sciences are the source of this prediction and what kind of changes that they say are coming?
I think we all know that we're all being ripped out of our comfort zones, and that pretty well every area of our life is changing at an accelerating rate. There was a UC Berkeley study, actually over 40 years, that studied emotional intelligence. They determined that emotional intelligence was 400% more important than intellectual intelligence in creating success. And quite frankly, I think that number is low. I think it's very low. So one of the things that I often say to folks on these podcasts is that I guarantee, and I want to underline guarantee, the development of your emotional intelligence will ensure your career and personal success. And I'll give you an example of a company that's currently doing over $1 trillion a year in revenue, that their primary hiring focus is on the search for people with above average levels of emotional intelligence. And as soon as I tell you who it is, you'll quickly be able to understand what I'm referring to. That company is Apple. Okay. And that's why when you walk into an Apple store, that energy you feel is an example of a more emotionally intelligent environment. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're trying to understand your pain and, if possible, provide a solution to that pain. They want you to have a great experience, and maybe you'll tell your friends, and maybe they'll tell their friends. So the energy within that store and the way customers and employees feel about each other is a reflection. It's very different than the energy in the stores around it. So in a lot of respects, the development of emotional intelligence represents the future of organizational development.
Okay. Can you talk about the differences in a leader that is not tuned in with this EI versus one who is, and how they operate in business?
If you need a title to get people to follow you, you're not a leader. If your actions, if your behavior doesn't inspire followers, you're not a leader. And leadership is not a position. It's a choice that each one of us needs to make, whether we're folding boxes in the warehouse or we're signing checks in the C-suite. We all need to be better leaders. And that means that we need to do the emotional labor of learning to lower our walls. We need to become less resistive, judgmental, and attached to outcome. And as we do that, that behavior and the results that behavior will create will inspire people to want to follow your example. That's real leadership. That's inspirational leadership, as opposed to position-based power leadership that seeks to control and manipulate others.
Okay, so when I was listening to you speak, consciousness came to mind. So I know that you do equate consciousness, it folds into EI. When I'm thinking of consciousness, it really comes, for me, it comes from a spiritual perspective. It encompasses more than just the workplace, the neighborhood that I live in, but the world. Can you talk about how EI actually, I think it encompasses a couple of things, not just consciousness, but it's a level of confidence too within yourself. But can you talk about that, how that changes how people deal with each other and how it empowers the workplace?
Sure. We're only actually conscious about 3 to 5% of the time. The rest of the time, we're relying on our unconscious habits to determine our behavior and our results. So the more focused we are in the present moment, the more we're conscious of what's going on in us and around us. And that requires that we learn to lower our walls so that we become less resistive, less judgmental, less attached to outcome. You see, our ego never wants us to be in the present moment. Our ego wants us to always be focused on some potentially better future moment that will never exist, or some past moment that doesn't exist any longer. But it never wants us to be in the present moment. And when we're being controlled by our ego wants us to think in terms of we're better than or we're less than others, but we're never equal to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way we're unconsciously giving away our energy. Let me give you an example, actually from my MBL program.
Okay.
One of the habits is called authentic listening. And the key to authentic listening is to not take anything personally, because how somebody feels about you has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on inside of them, whether their walls are up or down. But if how we feel about ourselves is based on how somebody else feels about us, who's controlling our life, us or them?
Of course, them. Yeah, you're
Right.
being controlled from outside.
So when you think about, for instance, all of social media where people are clamoring and begging to be liked, what they're really doing is they're really giving away their energy to anybody that will take it to determine how they should feel about themselves.
Yeah, that's a very scary thought, Phil. And we know that it's true. We hear about, these stories where these teens have committed suicide because somebody said something negative about them or some pictures were posted or whatever, and they just don't feel like they can recover from it. It's very sad that has become the state of the reality for a lot of people.
It's actually been going on for a very long time. The internet and social media has just accelerated the process.
Yeah,
yep.
That's very true. So I was thinking about EI, and you talk about authentic business leadership. Can you share a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, you can't have organizational change without individual change. Organizational change must begin with individual change. The individuals have to be willing to do the work of reconnecting with who they are so that their behavior and the results can inspire others to follow their example. Unfortunately, most people aren't willing to do the very challenging emotional labor that change requires. So what they do instead is they try and use position-based power to get other people to change, to control and manipulate others, to get them to change because they're unwilling to change themselves. And unfortunately, that's what we've been doing for a very, very long time. And that's why the level of employee engagement has continually gone down year over year over the last 30 years.
Yeah. And the pandemic has certainly increased that. And
that's a good point. The pandemic and having to be work remotely has really kind of woken a lot of people up that they just don't want to go back into those toxic environments. It's really forcing organizations to change, and they're changes that are long overdue.
Talking about organizational change has reminded me that businesses reacted to the pandemic changes by looking for a quick fix. We really didn't think that it was going to be that long, right? And so they looked to apply a Band-Aid approach rather than looking deeper to root causes. But we had no idea when COVID started that the depth of change that was going to be coming at us. So now, because of all that's happened, we've witnessed another revolution in change in employment, and that is the Great Resignation. Sometimes it gets called the Great Quit. It has a lot of different names, but it's brought more change because a lot of people have left their jobs, about 30% of them. And older workers, too, they've left and aren't coming back. They're waiting it out, so to speak. These workforce changes have been combined along with a skilled worker shortage, which has been on the rise because of the way that we do business during the pandemic, depending on technology. All these changes have forced business to flex and find new solutions for the business and try to find ways to keep the current employees that they have. So they've done lots of different things like offering flex options to their employees, offering remote work possibilities, special perks, and just all kinds of changes and options that they have added.
Yeah. Hope's not really a strategy. There's only two things that will cause people to change. One is pain. The other one is passion. And hardly anybody's really connected to their passion. So that unfortunately, it usually requires pain or an urgent desire for better results than they're currently getting to create that motivation to begin the change process. And with the accelerating rate of global change, the longer people wait to begin to develop their emotional intelligence, the more pain they're going to be in. So if somebody's not willing to change, it simply means they're not yet in enough pain, and you can't help them. The people I work with, the executives and organizations I work with, all have an urgent desire for better results than they're currently getting. That's really the starting point, because if you don't have that motivation to do the work that change requires, you may want better results, but you're never going to get better results.
Right.
The change process is extremely difficult. As a matter of fact, Mark Twain, a long time ago, said if the only way mankind can learn is through experience, I see no hope for mankind. And what he really meant was, if the only way we can learn is by putting our hand on the stove, that assumes that we're going to be around to learn from that experience. And with a lot of the challenges we're going to be facing going forward, like CRISPR-Cas9, gene editing technology, and climate change, and AI, and other pandemics, we may not get a do-over. So we really need to develop the wisdom and the emotional intelligence to make better choices without putting our hand on the stove.
Well, I really hope that people start working on their AI. I have seen it referred to, even in job descriptions, looking for people with good emotional intelligence. However, on the opposite side of that, I don't know if they know how to recognize it once they see it, right?
The more emotionally intelligent somebody is, the more they'll be able to recognize it in other people. But you're right. If you lack emotional intelligence, if you tend to be ruled by your ego-based fear, it'll be impossible for you to see the emotional intelligence of somebody else. As a matter of fact, if they are emotionally intelligent, you will view that emotional intelligence as a threat, and you're not likely to hire them.
Interesting thought. So if someone's interviewing and they have a high level of emotional intelligence, they'll be able to sense in their interview that their interviewer, something that's going on there. They should be able to feel that that person is being threatened, and then later deduced that this may be a factor in why they may not advance in the process. Would you tell us a little bit more about your MBL program, and who is your target client that you look to work with?
Target client are executives that are in a lot of pain, that have an urgent desire for better results that they're currently getting. The MBL program is initially a 16-week program where we get together once a week for about an hour for 16 weeks. I give them the habits and the micro skills to obtain remarkable results. There are individuals and organizations that I've been working with for over 13 years because the ROI in doing this work keeps getting greater and greater. Let me give you a quick analogy between the difference between intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence. So let's look at intellectual intelligence as somebody giving us $10,000 a day for 31 days. So at the end of 31 days, you've got $310,000. And look at emotional intelligence as somebody giving you a penny that doubles in value every day for 31 days. So day one, you've got a penny. Day two, you've got 2 pennies. Day 31, you've got $10.7 million. And actually continuing on, day 40, you've got over 5 billion. Day 50, you've got over 5 trillion. Point is that the development of our emotional intelligence will produce results that will far outpace results that we can produce with our intellectual intelligence. And it actually represents a critical part of our development that we never got. Our educational system has failed us. Our employment system has failed us. It's failed to prepare us for the times we're living in. The development of our emotional intelligence isn't a solution to the challenges we face. It is the only solution to the challenges we face.
I'm thinking that one of the ways to explain it is if you are emotionally intelligent and you are looking, let's say you're not even looking to hire, the person's already within your organization. You're looking at them and you're not judging them. You're listening to what they have to say if you're trying to resolve some problem or issue. and you are open. You're much more open to hearing what solutions may be and considering them. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Because we've evolved from society, from tribes, from herds, over millions of years, we've had to develop the ability to sense whether somebody's trying to help us or eat us. So we have these specialized brain cells in our prefrontal cortex that brain scientists called mirror neurons. And that's why you can walk into a room and sense the energy in the room, or you can have a conversation with somebody and have a sense of whether they truly care about you and are trying to help you or take advantage of you. So as you develop your emotional intelligence, as you learn to become less resistive, judgmental, and attached to outcome, people will automatically sense that about you and be drawn to you. And that's the true measurement of leadership.
Okay. All right. Phil, how can people connect with you to learn more about the MBL program?
Best way to reach me is through my LinkedIn profile. I've got my Zoom calendars on there, and I'd be happy to meet with anybody that wants to continue the conversation and find out more.
Okay, sounds good. I did want to point out that one of your accomplishments is that you've written several books. Can you tell us a little bit about the books you've written and where we can find them?
Sure. So I've been an executive coach for the last 21 years, but in that time I've written 6 or 8 books. I've written over 5,000 articles, and I wouldn't recommend any of them. I wrote those books for me. You can purchase them on Amazon, but I would really recommend you don't. If you really want to get some free advice and a much quicker solution than reading a book, I'd suggest you contact me directly.
Okay.
See, having a conversation or reading a book or watching a video is an intellectual process and will do nothing to develop your emotional intelligence. The development of emotional intelligence is an experiential process. It is not an intellectual process. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't buy any of my books, and I would suggest instead that we have a conversation.
Right. So that they are not just reading about it, but they're actually doing something about it.
Right.
Well, Phil, it has been my pleasure to speak with you. I know it's been a great learning experience for the listener about emotional intelligence. And now that they've gotten a glimpse into how important it is to our lives and especially for us moving forward, they have at least some information to take steps on developing their AI quotient. Thanks for being here and giving us this information.
Oh, Sindy, thanks for having me on your show. And thank you very much for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Take care now.
You too.
So glad you joined us today. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like us because your ratings matter. We'll be bringing you new podcasts every 2 weeks on the first and third Wednesdays. My goal is to help you, my valued listeners, in your job search and continue to help you right on through your work life. To make that happen, though, your support is needed. By listening regularly, we can keep this going. But you can also help by sharing the podcast with your network of friends, family, and coworkers. Ask them to listen. We're on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and so many more. Not so podcast savvy? Tell them they can go to listen on our website at www.insiderscareerclub.com. I appreciate your support. Stay safe and take care.